At 6:30 p.m. on the 20th of December 1995, a Boeing 757-200 sits on the taxiway of Miami International Airport in the United States. The 155 passengers and 8 crew members aboard American Airlines Flight 965 are growing impatient, eager to begin their journey to the city of Cali in the South American country of Colombia. Many of the passengers aboard are flying to Cali to be with their families for the Christmas and New Year period. The flight was originally scheduled to depart from Miami at 4:45 p.m., but connecting passengers to the flight had been delayed by winter storms affecting the northeastern United States, pushing the departure back by 30 minutes. Since pushing back from Gate D33, the flight has been stuck on the taxiway for another 45 minutes, waiting on a departure slot from air traffic control. In the cockpit this evening are 2 highly experienced pilots. Commanding American Airlines Flight 965 is Captain Nicholas Tafuri, aged 57, supported by First Officer Don Williams, aged 39. Captain Tafuri and First Officer Williams have 13,000 and 6,000 hours of flight experience respectively. First Officer Williams will be piloting the aircraft on this leg of the journey. The aircraft they will be flying, a Boeing 757-200, has the largest capacity of any single-aisle airliner ever built, nicknamed the Flying Pencil for its elongated body. Finally, 1 hour and 15 minutes after leaving the gate, the controllers at Miami International Airport give American Airlines 965 permission to line up on runway 27 right and begin its takeoff roll. At 6:35 p.m., the aircraft thunders down the runway, nosing up into the clear and calm Florida evening, on its way to Cali at last. You are listening to Inside the Black Box. This is the story of American Airlines Flight 965.
Pull up! Pull up!
After departing Miami International Airport to the west, American Airlines 965 turns south and is cleared by air traffic control to a cruising altitude of 37,000 feet. The flight's 3-hour journey takes it through Cuban and then Jamaican airspace until reaching Colombian airspace under the control of Bogota Area Control Center. At 9:20 p.m., about 3¼ hours after leaving Miami, the pilots are about half an hour from their destination at Cali. As the aircraft continues its southerly track, cruising on autopilot, the pilots are discussing the cabin crew's duty time. They are concerned that because of the flight's late departure from Miami, the cabin crew will not be able to start working in time to meet their scheduled departure the following morning. Captain Tafuri calculates that if they land by 10 p.m., they should be able to meet their scheduled departure of 9:50 a.m. the following morning. The pilots then change the topic and discuss how they feel lucky to be undertaking short flights, such as the Miami to Cali route, instead of flying to locations such as Sao Paulo, situated further south on the South American continent, and with a flight time of closer to 8 hours. At 9:25 p.m., Captain Tafuri states that they should begin their descent into Cali. The captain asks First Officer Williams, who is the pilot flying at this time, to keep their speed up during the descent in order to get to Cali as quickly as possible and not lose any more time. In order to commence their approach into Cali, Captain Tafuri contacts the area controller at Bogota Area Control Center to request a lower altitude. American Airlines 965 is initially cleared to descend from 37,000 feet to 24,000 feet. Next, Tafuri contacts American Airlines Operations Center at Cali and tells the dispatcher that they will be at the airport in about 25 minutes. He also requests information on the weather. The weather is reported to be good, about 23 degrees Celsius, and fairly clear. Captain Tafuri confirms that they will be parking at Gate 02, and the runway will be 10. With the runway being 10, American Airlines 965 will be landing facing north. After speaking with the company dispatcher at Cali, Captain Tafuri tells First Officer Williams he is going to talk to the people. Turning on the interphone, he tells the passengers, Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Tafuri. We've begun our descent for landing at Cali. It's a lovely evening as we had expected. We'll pass a shower or two on the way in, but at the field right now, it's good visibility. The temperature is 23, that's 23 degrees Celsius, and if you prefer Fahrenheit, that's 72 degrees on the Fahrenheit scale. The winds are 10 miles an hour from the northwest. It's a very, very pretty evening. I'd like to thank everyone for coming with us. Again, I apologize for being late tonight. These things do happen sometimes. Very frustrating, but there wasn't much we could do about it. Again, I appreciate your patience in the matter. I'd like to wish everyone a very happy holiday and a healthy and prosperous 1996. Thank you for coming with us. 7 minutes later, at 9:32 p.m., American Airlines 965 has completed its descent to 24,000 feet, and Captain Tafuri requests another lower altitude from the area controller at Bogota. The controller clears the aircraft for 20,000 feet and advises the pilots to contact the approach controller at their destination airport of Cali. At this point, American Airlines 965 is approaching a long valley which runs from north to south. The city of Cali and its airport sits within this valley and is bordered by high mountains to the east and west. The night outside, while clear with little wind or clouds, is very dark as there is no moon tonight. In order to safely land at Cali, the aircraft must follow an instrument approach. This is essentially a list of instructions which rely on the aircraft's flight instruments to execute and do not require visibility outside of the aircraft. The instructions are laid out in a standardized format on a piece of paper called an approach chart. If followed correctly, the instructions on the approach chart will set the aircraft up to land successfully on runway 01. The instructions include waypoints the aircraft is to fly to, and the desired altitudes and speeds the aircraft should be flying at each given waypoint. Because the approach is designed to be flown without any external visibility and using only the aircraft's instruments, these waypoints cannot be landmarks or geographical features. Instead, the aircraft must use waypoints comprising of radio beacons. At Cali, there are two different types of radio beacons being used as waypoints, known as VORs and NDBs. VOR stands for VHF Omnidirectional Range. A VOR enables aircraft to fix its position and navigate using the radio waves coming from the beacon. The VOR works by emitting two radio signals. The first radio signal is emitted in a very narrow beam and rotates around the beacon at a constant speed, like a lighthouse's searchlight. The second beacon is emitted in all directions at once, like a strobe. The second strobing signal is emitted only when the first signal is facing directly north. By measuring the amount of time between when the omnidirectional signal is detected and when the narrow directional beam is received, The aircraft's equipment can calculate its bearing relative to the waypoint, and also what bearing the aircraft needs to fly to reach that waypoint. VOR beacons are usually combined with DME, or distance measuring equipment. As the name suggests, this equipment enables the aircraft to calculate how far it is away from the installation, again using radio waves. In comparison to VOR, NDB stands for non-directional beacon. It is simply a radio signal sent out in all directions, like the strobe of the VOR, but without the additional focus signal beam. In the cockpit, the pilots use a direction finder, which really just points to the signal in order to navigate towards it. The NDB does not give the aircraft accurate information on the aircraft's bearing relative to the waypoint, or its distance. At Cali Airport, for the instrument approach onto runway 01, the pilots must first head to a VOR known as Tallulah. The Tallulah VOR is situated 34 miles to the north of Cali Airport. After reaching the Tallulah VOR, American Airlines 965 is then to head to the Cali VOR. Although this waypoint shares the same name as the airport, it is actually situated about 9 nautical miles south of the runway. Once the aircraft reaches the Cali VOR, it will perform a 180-degree turn and land on the runway, facing north. Each of these waypoints is programmed into the Boeing 757's flight management computer. The flight management computer is essential equipment for the pilots to navigate and helps them in a number of ways. First, the flight management computer tells the pilots where they are. In 1995, GPS navigation was only just becoming available for commercial airlines. Instead of GPS, the aircraft uses the radio signals it receives from VOR and DME equipment it encounters during the flight to fix its position. By knowing the location of these waypoints in its database and measuring the signals being received, the aircraft can accurately calculate its position. The flight management computer also provides the pilots with a visual representation of where they are and where they are headed. In front of each pilot is an EHSI, which stands for Electronic Horizon Situation Indicator. The flight management computer takes the position of the aircraft it has calculated, as well as the waypoints within its database, and displays this on a real-time map for the pilots. Before departing on the flight, the pilots program in the planned route into the flight management computer. They then follow the preset waypoints from their departure all the way to their destination, using the EHSI as a visual reference for their progress. In the cockpit of American Airlines 965 at this moment, the EHSI shows the Tallulah VOR as the pilot's next waypoint, followed by the Cali VOR as per the instructions on the approach chart. At 9:35 p.m., 10 minutes after commencing their descent, Captain Tafuri makes initial contact with the approach controller based at Cali Airport. He advises that American Airlines 965 is descending to 20,000 feet per the instructions from the Bogota area controller. The approach controller requests the aircraft's DME from Cali, which, as we discussed before, is the distance from the Cali VOR. Captain Tafuri reports their distance from Cali as 63 miles. The approach controller at Cali authorizes American Airlines 965 to proceed to the Cali VOR and to report when they have passed the Tallulah VOR. Captain Tafuri acknowledges and responds that they are cleared direct to the Cali VOR. Since the aircraft is cleared direct to Cali, Captain Tafuri selects the Direct To option on the Boeing 757's flight management computer. This clears the Tallulah waypoint from the EHSI, showing the most direct route to get to the Cali VOR. With this done, Captain Tafuri then activates the aircraft seatbelt lights and instructs the cabin crew to prepare the aircraft for landing. 1 minute later, at 9:36 p.m., the approach controller at Cali makes contact with American Airlines 965. He asks, "Sir, the weather is calm. Are you able to approach Cali runway 19er?" Since the weather is good, with very little wind in any direction, the controller has asked if American Airlines 965 wants to change its approach. Instead of passing the airport, performing a 180-degree turn and landing, the approach controller has asked if the pilots want to perform a straight-in approach and land in the same direction they are currently traveling in. For the pilots of American Airlines 965, this is good news. An approach to runway 19 will save them time, reducing some of their worries about duty time for the cabin crew and getting the passengers on the ground more quickly. However, the pilots will need to hurry. The aircraft will have less time to lose altitude before landing at Cali because of the shorter approach. Captain Tafuri asks First Officer Williams if he wants to shoot for runway 19er. Williams replies that they will need to scramble to get down, but they can do it. Back on the radio, Captain Tafuri tells the Cali approach controller that they would like to land on runway 19er, but they need a lower altitude immediately. In response, the controller clears American Airlines 965 for an approach onto runway 19, known as the Rosso 1 arrival. The approach is so named because of the Rosso NDB being the final waypoint before landing. The approach controller also asks the pilots again to confirm when they have passed the Tallulah VOR, then further confirm when the aircraft is 21 miles out and at 5,000 feet, per the instructions on the approach chart for runway 19. On the ground at Cali Airport, the approach controller is essentially blind to what is happening in the skies above him. While Cali is equipped with an approach radar, it is not currently operational. The radar has been destroyed by FARC, a paramilitary guerrilla movement active in Colombia at this time. As a consequence, the approach controller has no idea where American Airlines 965 is located, and is entirely reliant on the position reports from the pilots to fix their position. 30 seconds after giving American Airlines 965 clearance to land on runway 19, the approach controller receives a transmission from the aircraft. "Can American Airlines 965 go direct to Rosso and then do the Rosso arrival, sir?" The controller pauses for a moment and thinks. This request doesn't make much sense. The Rosso NDB is the last waypoint before landing, situated only 3 miles from the end of the runway. The approach onto runway 19 needs to be commenced 34 miles out from the runway, at the Tallulah VOR. With English not being his first language, and worrying that he might be misunderstanding the request, the approach controller reconfirms the approach. "Affirmative. Take the Rosso 1 and runway 19er. The wind is calm." He again repeats, "Report Tallulah and 21 miles and 5,000 feet. 45 seconds pass. Expecting American Airlines 965 to have passed Tallulah by now, the approach controller contacts the aircraft again and asks, "American 965, distance now?" The aircraft replies, "The distance from Cali is 38. At a distance of 38 miles from the Cali VOR, American Airlines 965 would already be 6 miles past Tallulah. The approach controller assumes that the pilots, in their hurry to execute their approach, simply forgot to advise the controller that they had passed the Tallulah VOR. 1 minute and 10 seconds passes. The approach controller receives another, slightly confused message from American Airlines 965. And American 38 miles north of Cali, and you want us to go to do Tallulah and then do the Roseau to the runway, right? To runway 19? The controller does not understand why the pilots keep asking him to confirm the approach. He responds, "You can land runway 19er. You can use runway 19er. What is your altitude and DME from Cali?" The aircraft replies that their altitude is 10,000 feet and their DME is 37. Again, the controller pauses. The position report doesn't make sense. A full minute has passed since American Airlines 965 had advised its DME was 38, and now the pilots were telling the controller they had moved only 1 mile in that time. The controller would expect the aircraft to be approximately 5 miles closer to the airport based on its speed. Nevertheless, he acknowledges the report and asks the pilots to confirm when they were established on final approach at 5,000 feet. 30 seconds pass. The approach controller contacts American Airlines 965 and asks the pilots to confirm their altitude. The aircraft responds quickly, "Niner 65, 9,000 feet. The controller asks, "Roger, distance now?" He doesn't receive a response. The controller contacts the aircraft again and asks them to confirm their position, but receives no response. Again and again, the controller attempts to make contact, but hears nothing. From the perspective of the controller sitting at Cali, with no radar and relying on the position fixes from the pilots, American Airlines 965 has disappeared. At 9:50 p.m., 8 minutes after the last transmission from American Airlines 965, personnel at Cali Airport notify search and rescue coordinators located in the area that a commercial airliner is missing. 40 minutes later, Civil Defense, Red Cross, police, and Army resources are mobilized. They head to where there have been reports of a loud noise near the town of Buga, which sits to the northeast of Cali. The initial search is hampered by the dark, moonless night, and the aircraft cannot be located. In the early morning light of the 21st of December, a military helicopter lifts off, looking for any sign of American Airlines 965. At 6:30 a.m., the crew of the helicopter spot something. There, 9,000 feet above sea level, on the ridge of a mountain known as El Diluvio, and amidst a swathe of flattened trees, lies the wreckage of a large commercial airliner. It can only be American Airlines 965. Within minutes of spotting the wreckage, rescuers land at the crash site. When looking at the wreckage, rescuers were fairly certain that nobody could have survived the accident. Initial reports, even from American Airlines themselves, state that they do not expect there to be any survivors. Nevertheless, 5 people are found alive amongst the wreckage of the shattered Boeing 757. One of those pulled from the wreckage will later die in hospital from their injuries. A dog travelling in the aircraft's cargo hold has also survived the impact. The victims of the accident, including the survivors, have injuries consistent with trauma caused by rapid deceleration. Despite the miracle that some aboard have survived, 151 passengers and 8 crew members travelling aboard American Airlines Flight 965 are dead. Responsibility for the investigation of the disaster fell with Colombia's Special Administrative Unit of Civil Aeronautics, known informally as Aeronautica Civil. This governing body plays a similar role in Colombia as the Federal Aviation Administration does in the United States. However, unlike the FAA, Aeronautica Civil is also tasked with investigating aviation accidents within Colombia. Investigators were dispatched from Bogota on the morning following the accident and arrive at the crash site only 2 hours after the rescuers. Until this point, the Boeing 757 had not been involved in a major accident in its 12 years of service, so investigators were keen to understand what had happened to bring down an airliner with such an exceptional safety record. The first clues to the accident sequence were provided by the location of the wreckage itself. The crash site was almost at the summit of a ridge on the mountain of El Diluvio, covered by rainforest. The investigators looked at the pattern of trees at the impact site. On the east side of the mountain were many broken trees in a pattern that was narrow at first but rapidly became wider. The pattern of broken trees was then followed by a swathe where the trees had been either flattened or torn from the earth. Some pieces of wreckage were found here, including the APU tail cone and the thrust reversers of the aircraft's engines. However, the majority of the wreckage of American Airlines 965 had continued over the top of the ridge and landed on the other side of the mountain. It was there that the cockpit, parts of the fuselage, and the aircraft's engines were found. The two Rolls-Royce RB211 engines were located with one having been partially buried in the ground. Both engines had ingested soil and debris deep within them. This was a strong indication to the investigators that the engines had been operating at the time of the accident, since debris could not have reached these parts of the engine otherwise. The shape of the debris field told the investigators its own story. First, the symmetrical shape of the damage to the trees indicated that the aircraft was travelling straight at the time of impact. Next, the tree damage, which widened rapidly, accompanied by wreckage from the tail section of the aircraft, indicated that the Boeing 757 had hit the forest with its tail first, before the rest of the aircraft had begun striking the trees. For the tail to strike the side of the mountain first, the aircraft would have had to have been in a steep, nose-up attitude at the time of impact. Finally, the fact that the debris was scattered along a long trail told the investigators that the aircraft had been climbing at the time of impact. Otherwise, the debris would have been much more localized, not to mention more heavily fragmented. It looked as if the pilots were trying to outclimb the mountain as they had been heading towards it. Obviously, the pilots had been unsuccessful, but only just. The aircraft had struck the ridge only a few hundred feet below its summit. Perhaps what was most surprising about the wreckage was where it was located. Instead of being on the planned flight path heading towards Cali airport, it was about 10 miles to the east. And instead of the aircraft flying south on its planned approach path, it had impacted the ridge travelling southwest. It appeared as though American Airlines 965 was heading towards the airport, but it was not immediately obvious why the aircraft was so far off its planned course. With an initial assessment of the accident area completed, the laborious task of recovering bodies and as much of the wreckage as possible was commenced. A base of operations was set up in the closest town of Buga, and a forward base was established at a farmstead at 8,000 feet. Reaching the forward base could be accomplished by a 5-minute trip by helicopter. What was more common, however, was a 2.5-hour drive in military trucks up a winding dirt track. After reaching the forward base, the recovery teams would reach the main wreckage in two ways. The first option was a short helicopter ride to the summit of the ridge, followed by a precarious 700-foot walk down a steep and muddy hillside enclosed by rainforest. This would take 45 minutes to an hour. Alternatively, personnel could climb 600 feet through the same environment, which took between 1.5 hours and 3 hours, depending on conditions. Not only did those involved in the recovery effort have to deal with the inhospitable environment, they were also in an area of intense activity from Colombian guerrilla forces. A military presence was therefore always required for protection, and nobody was permitted to stay at the accident site or even the forward base overnight. The exhausting task of reaching the crash site had to be repeated daily. Despite the environment, the searchers were able to recover all of the victims of the accident. They were also able to find a number of critical pieces of wreckage, which included the Boeing 757's flight data recorder and cockpit voice recorder. These were sent to the NTSB's laboratories in the United States for data recovery. Crucially, searchers were also able to find circuit boards within the wreckage, which they hoped would contain what is known as non-volatile memory. Volatile memory is memory which only stores data for as long as it receives power, like RAM in your computer. Non-volatile memory will retain data even when the unit loses power, like the hard disk in your computer. All of the circuit boards that are located either do not contain non-volatile memory or are too badly damaged to have data recovered. All circuit boards, except one. The circuit board which did contain non-volatile memory formed part of the Boeing 757's flight management computer, which we discussed earlier. This card included the waypoints which the pilots had entered into the flight management computer during the accident flight, and what the pilots could see on their EHSI display. It had become clear fairly quickly that there was nothing mechanically wrong with the Boeing 757 that had flown into the ridge at El Diluvio. The engines had been generating full power. There was no mayday call or indication of a problem received from the aircraft, and there was no pre-impact fire. Instead, the investigators had to confront the possibility that American Airlines 965 had joined the long list of aircraft in history that had been lost through CFIT. CFIT is an acronym for Controlled Flight into Terrain, and is experienced when a perfectly functional aircraft is unintentionally flown into the ground, a mountain, a body of water, or other obstacle. It was not immediately clear why the aircraft had hit the mountain. The pilot should have known exactly where they were due to the sophisticated navigation system provided via the flight management computer. In addition, the Boeing 757, like all large commercial airliners, was fitted with a ground proximity warning system. In response to a spate of high-profile CFIT accidents during the 1960s and 1970s, a ground proximity warning system, or GPWS, was made mandatory in commercial airliners. Using the aircraft's radio altimeter, which measures the aircraft's height by bouncing radio waves off the ground below it, the GPWS is designed to warn the pilots of a potential controlled flight into terrain scenario. The GPWS will usually first caution the pilots of an issue, such as an excessive rate of descent, before changing to a warning and a command to pull up the aircraft. The GPWS fitted to American Airlines 965 should have warned the pilots of the approaching impact and instructed them to take corrective action, thus avoiding the accident. In addition to this, as we discussed earlier, Captain Tafuri and First Officer Williams were both highly experienced airmen. This was Captain Tafuri's 14th approach into Cali in his career, having undertaken 13 successful approaches before it. While this was First Officer Williams' first approach into Cali, he had flown into numerous other airports in South America before, and had undergone training on the dangers of flying in the mountainous terrain found in South America. With the information contained within American Airlines 965's flight data recorder and cockpit voice recorder, as well as the information contained within the non-volatile memory unit from the aircraft's flight management computer, the investigators were able to build a picture of the chain of events which ultimately led to the loss of the aircraft. To understand how two highly experienced airmen could fly a state-of-the-art aircraft into a mountain, we have to look back, minute by minute, at the approach of American Airlines 965 into Cali. We need to study the frame of mind, the decision-making of the pilots, and the systems of their aircraft, working for them and against them. The following is in no way a criticism of the airmen. It is an objective study of the decisions made, and a study of what has come to be known as human factors, which we are all susceptible to. At 9:34 p.m., American Airlines 965 has just been instructed by Bogota Area Control Center to contact the approach controller at Cali. The flight is already 1.5 hours behind schedule. Captain Tafuri and First Officer Williams have recently concluded a discussion on their concern about being able to fly the next morning. Both pilots are clearly worried that the flight attendants will not have a sufficient rest period to meet legal requirements, and are keen to get on the ground as quickly as possible. To build on this, Captain Tafuri has asked First Officer Williams, as pilot flying, to try and keep their speed up during the descent in order to make it to Cali as quickly as possible. Looking out of the cockpit window, the pilots can see only inky blackness, interspersed with lights from cities or towns below them. The enormous mountains, which flank and make up the valley which Cali is situated in, and which the aircraft is flying into, are invisible to them. First Officer Williams has the aircraft in a steady descent at this time, after being cleared to a new altitude of 20,000 feet. Captain Tafuri is manning the radios and programming in any required data to the Boeing 757's flight management computer for First Officer Williams to use. The aircraft is on autopilot, with the pilots selecting their desired altitude and direction using the flight management computer. The Boeing 757 is currently heading towards the Tallulah VOR. Everything is going as planned. Captain Tafuri makes contact with the Cali approach controller and states, Buenas noches, senor. American 965 leaving 230, descending to 200. Go ahead, sir. The controller replies, The distance, DME from Cali? Captain Tafuri reports that the DME is 63, indicating 63 miles from the equipment sitting at the Cali VOR. Cali approach states, Roger, is cleared to Cali VOR. Descend and maintain 15,000 feet. No delay expect for approach. Report Tallulah VOR. Captain Tafuri replies, Okay, understood. Cleared direct to Cali VOR. Report Tallulah and altitude 15. That's 15,000. Is that all correct, sir? Captain Tafuri is performing what is known as a readback. The crew of the aircraft will repeat the message they heard to confirm with the other radio operator that what has been said has been clearly understood and not misinterpreted. The approach controller replies, Affirmative. It is at this point that the approach into Cali begins to unravel. Captain Tafuri has understood the controller's instructions to mean that American Airlines 965 is cleared to proceed directly to the Cali VOR, with the expectation that they would pass by the Tallulah VOR and report when this happened. What the Cali approach wants the pilots to do was first fly to the Tallulah VOR and from there head to the Cali VOR, staying clear of any terrain in the area. In accordance with what Captain Tafuri believes to be the controller's instructions, and without first confirming with First Officer Williams, who is still the pilot flying, Tarfuri inputs the Direct To command on the flight management computer and selects Cali. Once this is executed, the other local VORs and NDBs on the EHSI between the aircraft's current position and Cali are deleted. From this point on, the only reference point the pilots have on their EHSI is the Cali VOR. 1 minute later, at 9:37 p.m., the Cali approach controller contacts American Airlines 965 again and asks them whether, since the conditions are calm, they wish to approach straight in and land on runway 19. The decision to change their approach entirely, landing on runway 19 instead of runway 01, will be taken in a 4-second exchange between the two pilots. Captain Tafuri asks First Officer Williams, "Would you like to shoot the 19 straight in?" First Officer Williams replies, "Yeah, we'll have to scramble to get down. We can do it." After speaking with First Officer Williams, Captain Tafuri confirms that American Airlines 965 wishes to make a straight-in approach to runway 19, but they will need a lower altitude right away. The approach controller replies, "American 965 is cleared to VOR DME. Approach runway 19er. Roseau number 1 arrival. Report to Lua VOR." Up until this point, the pilots have been fully expecting to land on runway 01. They have the approach chart for runway 01 in front of them, and all the data in their flight management computer is programmed to support a landing on runway 01. Now, the pilots need to expeditiously accomplish a number of tasks in order to perform a successful landing on runway 19. 1. Locate, remove from its binder, and position the new approach chart for the approach to runway 19. 2. Review the approach chart for relevant information such as radio frequencies, headings, altitudes, distances, and missed approach procedures. 3. Select and enter data from the airplane's flight management computer regarding the new approach. 4. Compare information on the approach chart with approach information displayed on the flight management computer. 5. Verify that selected radio frequencies, airplane headings, and flight management computer entered data were correct. 6. Recalculate airspeeds, altitudes, configurations, and other airplane control factors for selected points on the approach. 7. Hasten the descent of the airplane because of the shorter distance available to the end of the new runway. 8. Monitor the course and descent of the airplane while maintaining communications with air traffic control. Over the following minutes, these tasks will either be performed inadequately or not performed at all. In order to increase the rate of descent of the Boeing 757, First Officer Williams deploys the aircraft spoilers. Unlike the flaps or slats of an aircraft, which increase drag but also increase the wing's lift, the aircraft spoilers, which sit on the top of the wings, are designed to both increase drag and reduce the lift generated by the aircraft, increasing the rate of descent by making the wing less efficient. As a consequence of deploying the spoilers, the descent rate of the aircraft increases. Meanwhile, Captain Tafuri rifles through the approach charts before identifying and pulling out the approach chart for runway 19 at Cali. He notes Talua as being the first waypoint on the approach chart, followed by Roseau. However, upon looking at his EHSI, Captain Tafuri can no longer see the Talua VOR. He has deleted all the navigation beacons except Cali from his EHSI when he chose the Direct To command and selected Cali earlier when the pilots had been planning to land on runway 01. In order to simplify the approach, Captain Tafuri asks the approach controller whether American Airlines 965 can head straight to the Roseau NDB. The approach controller responds, "Affirmative, take the Roseau 1 and runway 19er. The wind is calm. Report to Lua." The same misunderstanding as with the Cali waypoint has just taken place. Captain Tafuri believes he is cleared to head directly to the Roseau waypoint and merely report passing over to Lua, when in reality, the approach controller wants American Airlines 965 to follow the standard approach and head to Talua, followed by Roseau. The investigators believe that at this stage, both pilots are experiencing a phenomenon known as recognition-primed decision-making. This psychological phenomenon relates to how experienced people will quickly make decisions in complex and pressured scenarios based on past experiences. In this case, when previously faced with similar situations in the past, where the pilots had been asked to execute an approach that was closer to the aircraft's position than anticipated, the highly experienced crew of American Airlines 965, each of whom had acquired years of experience as air transport pilots, accepted those offers and landed without any incident. There is nothing wrong with this decision-making model, but it can present problems, particularly when the situation changes and the decision maker does not re-evaluate the situation and revise their decision. As we will see, the situation is about to change rapidly. However, remember that for the remainder of the flight, no matter what happens, neither Captain Tafuri or First Officer Williams will reconsider their decision to land on runway 19. By not re-evaluating their decision to land on runway 19, the pilots are acting consistently with years of human factors research that tells us that once humans have made a decision, they are very reluctant to alter it after that decision has been made. Instead, the pilots will develop a sort of cognitive tunnel vision, with all efforts focused on landing the plane. At this point of the approach, American Airlines 965 is too close, too high, and too fast in order to execute a successful approach at Cali Airport. The approach continues. In response to what Captain Tafuri believes are the instructions he has been given by the approach controller, that is, to proceed directly to the Rosso NDB, Tarfuri prepares to input that new waypoint into the flight management computer. Looking at the Rosso NDB on the approach chart, he sees its identity as denoted by the letter R. He inputs the letter R into the database of navigation waypoints contained within the flight management computer. The logic of the flight management computer is to display the list of navigation waypoints with the identifier R in order of proximity to the aircraft. Captain Tafuri logically assumes that the first R on the list corresponds to the Rosso NDB, which is only about 20 miles away. Unfortunately, what Captain Tafuri cannot know is that this assumption is incorrect. When the company which created the database of the navigation waypoints that sits within the Boeing 757's flight management computer inputted the information on waypoints for Colombia, they discovered a problem. The identifier R was used by two waypoints within Colombia. One was for the waypoint Rosso, which we know sits slightly north of Cali Airport's runway. The second is for a waypoint called Romeo, which is a non-directional beacon sitting in Colombia's capital, Bogota, about 130 miles to the northeast of Cali. The company which created the database prioritized the waypoints which would receive the most traffic with the single letter identifier, R. In this case, that was the waypoint Romeo in Bogota. The Rosso NDB could only be called up on the flight management computer by entering the full name of the waypoint, ROZO. Instead, Captain Tafuri has inadvertently programmed the coordinates for waypoint Romeo in Bogota into the flight management computer. A dotted line appears on the EHSI, previewing the aircraft's proposed route. The dotted line turns out to the east, away from Cali, which is currently sitting directly in front of the aircraft. Without noticing the proposed deviation away from Cali, or telling First Officer Williams he is executing the course change, Captain Tafuri executes the command on the flight management computer. Almost imperceptibly, American Airlines 965 starts a gentle turn to the left, towards the east. The aircraft is still descending, In the cockpit, First Officer Williams is busy studying the approach chart for runway 19, while Captain Tafuri is manually programming the radio frequency for the Tallulah VOR, so that he can report to the controller when the aircraft has passed over it. But what Captain Tafuri doesn't realize is that American Airlines 965 passed over the Tallulah waypoint about 2 minutes ago, and is now well south of it. Without the reference on the EHSI, the pilots have not realized this. As both pilots are distracted, busy with their respective tasks, neither of which involve monitoring the aircraft's position, the Boeing 757 is still continuing its gentle turn to the left, towards the Romeo waypoint, located in Bogota. About a minute after commencing the turn, with American Airlines 965 at 15,000 feet and still descending, the approach controller at Cali contacts the aircraft once again, asking for their DME. The question prompts First Officer Williams to look at his EHSI, and it is at this stage that he realizes the aircraft is off course. He asks, where are we? Both pilots scan their EHSIs for more information. The Boeing 757 is now facing east, moving away from the waypoint at Cali. Where are we headed? First Officer Williams repeats, confused. Until a few seconds ago, he believed the aircraft was making steady progress south, down the valley towards Cali. Captain Tafuri replies, Tallulah? I don't know, what's this? Tallulah? What happened here? Both pilots are unclear on their position. It is at this stage that the approach to runway 19 should be abandoned. The pilot should head for the Cali waypoint, per the approach chart procedure for a missed approach, while gaining altitude to avoid the mountains surrounding them. Neither pilot even suggests abandoning the approach. Recognizing the course deviation, and in order to bring the aircraft back on course, First Officer Williams announces manual and uses the heading select feature on the Boeing 757's flight management computer to initiate a turn back towards the aircraft's desired approach path. The aircraft rolls out of its turn to the left and commences another gentle 20-degree turn, this time to the right, back towards the aircraft's intended course. Captain Tafuri tells First Officer Williams that he is going to input Tallulah into the flight management computer, the first waypoint on the runway 19 approach. He does so and executes the command, but because First Officer Williams has selected the manual heading select option, the Tallulah waypoint selection has no effect. Only the dotted line of the proposed route is shown, suggesting a turn back towards the left as the quickest route. The aircraft is already in a right turn back towards the proposed approach route, but the flight management computer is now telling the pilots to turn to the left, back towards Tallulah. First Officer Williams asks Captain Tafuri, "It's a left turn. You want a left turn back to Tallulah?" Captain Tafuri replies, "Nah, hell no, let's press on to..." First Officer Williams asks, "Press on to where though?" Tafuri thinks, then answers, "Where are we going? Come to the right. Let's go to Cali, first of all. We got fucked up here, didn't we?" Perhaps thinking he has misunderstood the Cali approach controller's instructions, Captain Tafuri once again contacts Cali Control on the radio and asks, "And American 38 miles north of Cali, you want us to go to Tallulah and then do the Rosso to the runway right, to runway 19? The Cali approach controller again confirms the approach and requests information on American Airlines 965's distance and altitude. This time, Captain Tafuri reports their distance as 37 nautical miles and their altitude as 10,000 feet. The aircraft is still descending. As the aircraft continues to turn back towards Cali, Captain Tafuri reassures First Officer Williams,
You're okay. You're in good shape now. You want to take the 19 yet? Incredibly, despite the pilots obviously being unaware of their exact location, and having just gone off course for no reason that would be apparent to them, Captain Tafuri is discussing continuing their approach. First Officer Williams states he wishes to head for the extended centerline of runway 19. This is an imaginary line drawn from the runway in the direction the aircraft will approach from. Captain Tafuri finishes First Officer Williams' sentence. That's Roseau. Why don't you just go direct to Roseau then, alright? This statement doesn't make sense, and further confirms the pilots are unsure of their position. The Roseau NDB lies near the end of the runway at Cali. There is no way the aircraft can commence landing at Roseau. Captain Tafuri begins to make the same mistake again, pressing the letter R on the flight management computer. Before he can input the command, the Cali approach controller contacts American Airlines 965 and requests an update on their altitude. Captain Tafuri quickly replies, 965, 9,000 feet. The Cali approach controller then asks for their distance. Captain Tafuri will not get a chance to reply. When American Airlines 965 had made its unintended turn to the east, it had been flying at 15,000 feet, well above the mountains that form the valley in which Cali was situated. As the aircraft headed off course, while continuing to descend, it passed over the mountains to the east of the valley in which Cali was located, and into another parallel valley beside it. After realizing their mistake, the pilots have now corrected their course and are returning to the runway's centerline, back towards the correct valley and over the mountain range again. However, there is a crucial difference between the first time American Airlines 965 had flown over the ridge and this time. The aircraft had been 6,000 feet higher.
Terrain. Pull up.
The GPWS activates in the cockpit, telling the pilots they are in imminent danger of striking the ground. Acting instantly in response to the invisible danger in front of him, First Officer Williams moves the thrust levers forward from their idle position to their take-off go-around setting and pulls back firmly on the aircraft's control yoke. The two Rolls-Royce RB211s spool up as commanded. The aircraft immediately enters into a steep climb. As the Boeing 757 pitches up, the aircraft begins to lose speed. In response to the steep angle of climb, the stick shaker activates on the pilot's control column. The stick shaker is designed to violently vibrate the aircraft's control yoke when the aircraft is approaching a stall. In accordance with his training, First Officer Williams relaxes the back pressure on the control yoke until the stick shaker stops, before pulling back once again. The stick shaker starts once more. Captain Tafuri commands, more, up, but it is too late. Traveling at 187 knots, in a steep nose-up attitude, the Boeing 757's tail begins striking the trees situated near the top of the ridge of El Diluvio. Next, the wings and fuselage make contact with a forest canopy, ripping the tops of the trees away. As the aircraft falls further into the forest, entire trees are ripped from the ground or flattened in the aircraft's wake. Once the aircraft strikes the ground itself, the majority of the airliner and the passengers aboard it are propelled over the ridge onto the west side. From the first warning from the GPWS until the time of impact, only 12 seconds had elapsed. First Officer Williams had done exactly as he had been taught in performing what is known as a GPWS escape maneuver, designed to climb the aircraft at the steepest angle possible to avoid oncoming terrain. He and Captain Tafuri had forgotten only one thing. During the entire escape maneuver, the aircraft's spoilers had still been deployed. This meant that the wings generated less lift than they would have had the spoilers been retracted, and as a consequence, the aircraft climbed more slowly. While we cannot be certain, various simulations of the GPWS escape maneuver performed by American Airlines 965 have been undertaken with the speed brakes deployed and retracted. Tragically, the general conclusion of these simulations is that had the spoilers been retracted at the time of the first GPWS warning, American Airlines 965 would have cleared the ridge of El Diluvio with just a few hundred feet to spare. The legacy of American Airlines Flight 965 for the commercial aviation industry is profound. The GPWS, which did function correctly in providing a warning, only gave the pilots a 12-second window to act. This is because of an inherent flaw with early GPWS. At the time, the system only used the radio altimeter, which measured what was directly below the aircraft, and not what was in front of it. While there had been other accidents as a consequence of this flaw, American Airlines 965 was the accident that fostered real change in the airline industry. From 1997 onwards, a new system began to be fitted to commercial aircraft, called Enhanced Ground Proximity Warning System. EGPWS adds a crucial piece to the system which became available to commercial aviation shortly after the loss of American Airlines 965: GPS information. Using GPS, the aircraft can plot exactly where it is on the Earth's surface, and therefore what terrain it can expect to find in its flight path. This terrain is now displayed on the pilot's EHSI, giving far more advanced warning of approaching terrain. In addition, pilots are regularly drilled on the EGPWS escape maneuver, including retracting the aircraft's speed brakes. Following the accident, greater efforts were made to ensure that data on published approach charts matched the data contained within the aircraft's flight management computer, so that there could be no confusion such as what befell the pilots of American Airlines 965. Another advancement was the introduction of terrain information onto the approach charts, which had previously been missing, giving the pilots greater knowledge of what to expect on their approach from a terrain perspective. A final legacy is that some of the components which made up the Boeing 757 operating as American Airlines 965 may have flown again. Because of the relatively slow impact of American Airlines 965, many of the components of the aircraft still appeared functional. Unofficial salvage teams looted the crash site, even as rescuers were still looking for the bodies of the victims. In a cruel irony, many of these parts would find their way back to Miami with falsified documents of their origin to be sold on the black market. In an effort to stop these parts being used on other aircraft, American Airlines released a 14-page document with the serial numbers of components which had not been recovered from the crash site. The loss of American Airlines 965 is a classic example of what has come to be known as the Swiss cheese model of accident causation. Each issue or problem taken individually would not have led to the loss of the aircraft, but the culmination of all these factors would line up to allow a commercial airliner to fly into the side of a mountain on December 20th, 1995. Thank you for listening to Inside the Black Box. Once again, I appreciate your patience in waiting while this episode was researched, written, and recorded. Please follow the podcast on Twitter at ITBB Podcast. That's India Tango Bravo Bravo Podcast. If you know of any communities or audiences that you think would enjoy the podcast, then please tell them about the show or send me a message. I'm always looking for new listeners. Until the next time.